She built an empire producing true crime shows about fraud, murder, and deception. Then she ended up on FBI's most wanted list, accused of stealing more than $30 million. Welcome to Nothing Felt Wrong, where we share stories about scams, deception, and manipulation, and how ordinary people get pulled into situations that feel believable until suddenly they don't. I'm Ann Genduso, and if you're fascinated by deception and human behavior, take a seat next to me here at the Side Eye Society. Today's story is about Mary Carole McDonnell, a television executive who produced some of the best known true crime series, including Corrupt Crimes, Deep Undercover, and one of my personal favorites to binge, Murderous Affairs. As CEO of Bellum Entertainment, McDonnell created a catalog of 30 shows with over 2,000 episodes. And from all accounts, it appeared that this was a story of a wealthy heiress who found a way to break out from her family's legacy to make her own mark in Hollywood until she became a fugitive. So, how does a successful true crime executive end up becoming the kind of person true crime shows are about? Let's find out. In 2016, Mary Carole McDonnell appeared to have it all. Her production company, Bellum Entertainment, was producing dozens of popular shows with thousands of episodes, and they were syndicated on major networks and aired on streaming services like Netflix. She had found a profitable niche in the true crime market, and fans couldn't get enough of her shows like It Takes a Killer, I Married a Murderer, and Bizarre Murders. The shows featured expert commentators like former FBI agents and retired law enforcement officers to paint a vivid picture of each crime. And the formula worked. In fact, fans were so insatiable that McDonnell could barely keep up with the demand for new episodes. Under her leadership, production schedules tightened, crew members worked long hours to produce more shows, and a new office opened outside of Bellum's headquarters in Burbank, California. And as any fiscally minded CEO would, she did it all on an extremely lean budget, which was bound to boost profits and please investors. McDonnell kept her full-time staff size small, relying primarily on freelancers and contractors to produce a steady slate of shows in a quick churn, almost factory-like setting. But extreme budgeting didn't extend to McDonnell's personal life. She appeared to enjoy the fine luxuries and perks that came with success. Each morning, she drove her Porsche through Burbank's Media District to the Bellum Entertainment office on West Alameda Ave, pulling into her specially reserved CEO parking spot. Colleagues say she religiously had her makeup done by the glam teen at the office, which is typically only for a studio's on-air talent and not everyday employees. For lunch, insiders say McDonnell often ate at Morton's Steakhouse, which was a fine dining favorite for TV execs given its proximity to NBC and Warner Brothers. And at the end of the workday, McDonnell could return to her $3.5 million estate in the affluent La Cañada area just north of downtown Los Angeles. For her after-hours leisure activities, McDonnell kept a 39-foot boat docked in Newport Beach. It was an opulent lifestyle for sure. But there was another part of her story that made her accomplishments seem even more impressive. She wasn't just a successful television executive. According to McDonnell, she was an heiress worth millions of dollars. She said she was part of the McDonnell family dynasty, heir to the fortune of McDonnell Douglas Corporation. That was a major aerospace manufacturer and defense contractor that merged with Boeing in 1997. Ted Eccles, a fellow television producer and production company owner, told Rolling Stone that McDonnell didn't hesitate to tell others about her family background. When she offered to buy his production company, Eccles questioned how she'd finance the venture. And according to him, McDonnell told him, quote, "Well, my last name is McDonnell, and there's an enormous trust fund that I am the beneficiary of in St. Louis, where my family's from. and I have lots of financial resources, end quote. But despite her reported heritage, McDonnell didn't rely on familial wealth or connections to pave her way professionally. It seemed she'd built her successful career by herself the hard earned way. Mary McDonnell achieved her executive status in the television industry after starting at the very bottom. Over decades, she worked her way up from secretary to CEO, branching out to create her own company in the mid 2000s while still serving as VP of programming at broadcasting company Raycom Media. And in 2015, she stopped working for others to grow her production and distribution company, Bellum Entertainment, full time. She was at the pinnacle of self made success. At least, that's what everyone thought. So, when payroll was late one day in 2017, Bellum employee Jeff Nimoy didn't immediately assume something was wrong. After all, the company was thriving, and he knew McDonnell was an aviation heiress. So, the payroll error must have just been a simple mistake. Then it happened again. Still, the Los Angeles showrunner figured things would work out and paychecks would resume. Nimoy believed he'd spend a 20-year career at Bellum. As he told NBC News, quote, "There's no way this thing is going down. They've got too much capital," end quote. But soon he would find out how wrong he was. After the first cracks appeared at Bellum Entertainment, payroll problems quickly became commonplace. Checks were often late, and when paychecks were issued, they weren't able to be cashed, at least not immediately. Sometimes the checks would bounce altogether, and people wanted to know what was happening. So the company explained. In June 2017, Bellum allegedly told staff that the company fell victim to significant bank fraud, which was messing up payroll, and they were working with their bank to resolve the problem. A letter provided to CBS Los Angeles assured employees that Bellum was doing well and the funds would be distributed during a specific week in July, and it thanked people for their patience. But by the time that week rolled around, the money wasn't there and the company moved the deadline. Still, it seemed reasonable that the problem would get sorted out and eventually paychecks would be issued. Because when the larger story makes sense, it's easy to find explanations for anything out of the ordinary. A missed paycheck wasn't evidence that Bellum was collapsing. It was a banking problem, a temporary mistake, something that surely would be fixed. And as they say in the business, the show must go on. Bellum's former supervising producer, Lee Frank, told CBS Los Angeles that he was still hiring people even though his own paycheck wasn't processed. He claimed he was owed close to $20,000 in pay that never materialized. Then, his new employees weren't paid either. And beyond Bellum's full-time employees, vendors and contractors started asking for their missing money. Catering staff weren't reimbursed for purchasing food on set. Actors weren't paid for their time, and even former FBI agents and cops who appeared as on-air experts were owed back pay. In July 2017, Bellum employees enjoyed a week-long hiatus, which was previously planned in celebration of the Independence Day holiday. But when it was time to return, employees received an email saying the break would be extended another week and that further instructions would follow about picking up paychecks. Then, the brand new New Orleans office shuttered mere weeks after it opened. And when Mary Carroll's own family members who worked for Bellum weren't paid, including her nephew, Peter McDonnell, who had been company's vice president for 10 years, that's when everyone knew something was very, very wrong. For the people who worked for Bellum, this wasn't just a company having financial problems. This was their monthly rent or mortgage checks, their groceries, their kids' school supplies. This was money they'd already earned from work already produced. And in some cases, this was money already spent. But for many, that money never made it to their bank accounts. So they adapted as best they could. Some made light of the situation, recalling that payday meant an impromptu race against their colleagues. They learned just because they received a paycheck didn't mean they'd been paid. Brian Testa, a producer and director for Bellum Entertainment, told NBC News, quote, "There would be a mad dash out the door to get them to the banks before the banks would close so you could cash them, because they would move money around. I had a lot of bounced checks," end quote. Andrew Knock, showrunner of season 2 of Corrupt Crimes, recalled his own experience to Business Insider. Quote, "There was a woman at the bank who would start laughing. Oh no, not more of these again," end quote. Between bank runs, the unpaid workers turned to each other for solace. Some employees formed a private Facebook group where they could share their financial losses, commiserate with other victims, and find others who were facing the same problem. The Bellum Class of 2017 group served as a psychological lifeline in a way. Employees who might have thought they were facing payment problems alone were able to realize that they weren't the only ones suffering, and they didn't have to do it in silence. In the community, they swapped notes to find out what was really happening. Producer Corinne Beckham started a poll to find out how much people were owed, and at the time of her interview with CBS Los Angeles in 2017, the total was over $350,000. All the while, Bellum was still promising everyone payment, but now it would come on Monday. And then it was Tuesday. And then it was Saturday. After all those empty promises, workers decided it was time to take their fight to the next level. So they brought their case to the local government. Roughly 50 employees filed unpaid wage claims to the California Labor Commissioner's office. Other employees filed their own civil lawsuits in an attempt to recoup unpaid wages. And then there was Aaron Kaju. The former contractor decided filing a claim wasn't enough. Aaron Kaju wanted the money Bellum owed him, which was $2,000 from his work on an episode of Mysteries of the Unexplained. But he also wanted something else. He wanted Mary Carole McDonnell held accountable, and perhaps he wanted her to get a taste of the fear and frustration that unpaid staff felt. So he struck back at McDonnell where it would hurt her most: her reputation. Kaju bought the domain name marycarolmcdonnell.com. Then he crafted a website draft filled with grievances about McDonnell, sharing what she did to her workers. And to really make his point, the site's defining feature was a large picture of her head on a pig's body. Kaju's plan was quite simple. He told McDonnell to pay him what he was owed by 5 p.m. on Friday, or he would push the site live. And the threat worked. He told news outlets that the day of the deadline, he was wired the money by 4:55 p.m., just in time. But Kaju wasn't satisfied. He decided to push the site live anyway, standing in solidarity with so many other employees and vendors who remained unpaid. He told News Nation, quote, "It was just the principle of the thing," end quote. And even though the site was short-lived, the damage remained. But despite the hit to her personal reputation, disgruntled workers were becoming the least of Mary Carole McDonnell's problems. Because by then, other people were starting to ask questions about Bellum's money. The walls started closing in fast for both Bellum Entertainment and its CEO. While staff were starting to notice missing paychecks, a wave of civil lawsuits and government investigations caused more pressing issues for McDonnell. In May 2017, Pacific Business Capital Corporation filed a lawsuit against McDonnell for failing to repay a $2.75 million loan. They had issued her that loan back in 2015 to fund Bellum and her other companies, but she had simply not paid them back. Then, in July, facing mounting debt, McDonnell sought another loan to keep her business afloat. And this should have been the break her business needed, but it would ultimately help unravel everything she'd built. In September 2017, there was more bad news. Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Frederick Schaller confirmed a $3.2 million arbitration award against Mary Carole McDonnell, turning a private dispute into an official court judgment. The suit was brought by Robert Christopher Chatham, an entertainment attorney who had at one time represented McDonnell. Over the years, he'd invested millions of dollars into her business and provided personal loans as well. But she hadn't paid him back either. And in the same month, the California Labor Commissioner's Office launched a massive investigation surrounding the unpaid wages claims. It seemed like Bellum, the production company once deemed too big to fail, was a failed empire, and it officially shut down. But that was just the beginning of McDonnell's troubles. So Bellum was in major debt and couldn't repay its loans or pay its employees. The business failed. But that just happens sometimes, right? But this was far more than just the collapse of a poorly managed business. This was the result of fraud amounting to more than $30 million. And the story only gets wilder from here. To understand what was happening inside Bellum, you have to understand how the company had been financed. Because while Bellum looked successful from the outside, behind the scenes, its finances told a very different story. Like many organizations, the enterprise was financed by private investors and bank loans. But unlike most companies, Bellum had been built on a fraudulent foundation. One that depended heavily on the story Mary Carole McDonnell told about herself, because she wasn't who she said she was. Remember that McDonnell aviation fortune? That enormous family trust? The money that supposedly made Bellum too big to fail? According to federal prosecutors, it didn't exist. McDonnell's model to fund Bellum was simple. She started by getting investors to back her shows with the promise of big returns, repayments, and extra perks. Perks like a lucrative tax benefits program, according to the suit filed by her old attorney, Robert Christopher Chatham. It's alleged that once she got the loan, she'd use the funds to line her own pockets by commingling assets with Bellum, and then she'd make payments on other loans she'd secured to fund the business. Remember those makeup sessions on the company's dime? Eventually, she defaulted on those loans. So in other words, it's alleged that Mary Carole McDonnell misused company funds and ran a Ponzi scheme of sorts to float her company. But how did she get the backing in the first place? Well, it turns out that McDonnell wasn't as self-made as it seemed. Remember, Mary Carole McDonnell told anyone who'd listened that she was an heiress to the McDonnell aircraft family fortune. So she had leaned on that family name to secure her loans. It's alleged that for years, McDonnell told private investors and financial institutions that she had a substantial family trust worth $80 million. And typically, a trust like that could be used as collateral to ensure repayment. But there was just one problem. According to federal prosecutors, that fortune didn't exist. So let's look at what happened with Bank of California, which is what led to the federal criminal indictment. When Mary Carole McDonnell requested a loan from the bank, she was recommended by her lawyer and current Bank of California customer, Barry Rothman. Court records allege that Rothman introduced McDonnell to the bank's vice president of relationship management, looking for a multi-million-dollar loan. Both Rothman and McDonnell claimed that McDonnell was heir to the large fortune, but her trust assets were temporarily frozen. And while she couldn't access it quite yet, it could prove she'd made good on her loan payments. After all, the trust was worth far more than the $14.7 million she was requesting. Still, some bank employees had reservations about giving the loan. Court documents say that bank investigators found her credit score was 545, and a poor credit history is typically considered problematic for loan requests. Plus, there was talk that she wasn't paying her workers. But McDonnell and Rothman reassured the bank that the loan would be secure. The bank alleges that McDonnell supplied them with a signed account statement showing that she was the beneficiary of a family trust account at Northern Trust Securities, Inc., with a balance of more than 28 million. It wasn't the full 80 million, but it could work to secure the loan. And after McDonnell reportedly came into the Bank of California's office to hand out homemade pies to the company's staff for all their hard work helping with the loan, it did. Shortly after the loan went through, Carole McDonnell withdrew all the funds, immediately raising red flags for the bank. According to Jamie Rice, a former Bank of California VP turned true crime podcaster, McDonnell missed her very first loan payment. Then she stopped answering their calls. So Bank of California investigated further, and what they found shocked everyone, because they quickly discovered that none of it was real. The aviation family connection was fabricated. The trust didn't exist. The notarized documents were forged. And even the homemade pies she charmed bank employees with were reportedly store-bought. And this was far from the first time McDonnell had used the family trust ruse to score some cash. It was just the latest in a reportedly long line of fraudulent schemes spanning personal acquaintances, family members, and major financial institutions over the years. Rolling Stone reported that McDonnell even scammed her own sons, Sean and Mackenzie, when she allegedly forged their signatures for a $2.5 million quick payday loan in 2017, which, of course, she then defaulted on. So the Bank of California got the federal government involved to fight back. On December 12, 2018, McDonnell's house of cards officially came crashing down. This time, it wasn't just a slew of civil lawsuits or employees coming after her. Now it was a federal criminal indictment. That day, McDonnell was charged with bank fraud and aggravated identity theft, and a federal arrest warrant was issued in the United States District Court, Central District of California, Santa Ana, California. In it, McDonnell is alleged to have knowingly defrauded Bank of California, among other institutions. It seemed like finally justice was in sight for all the individuals and corporations who were victimized by Bellum's CEO. But there was just one problem. Carole McDonnell was gone. Despite the indictment, it appeared that McDonnell had already fled the country and she was out of reach. For 7 years after she fled, it seems little headway was made in the attempt to apprehend the fake heiress. And in today's internet-obsessed world, she has a surprisingly small digital footprint. But I suppose that's common for criminals who don't want to be found. The financial lawsuits and judgments have continued to rack up in the U.S. while McDonnell has been on the run. And she hasn't paid a dime for any of them. But the hunt for her never stopped. So in December of 2025, the FBI exerted even more pressure. They bestowed a distinction that most of us would rather not have. They added Carole McDonnell to the FBI's most wanted list. According to the FBI bulletin, McDonnell, who is now 74, is believed to be in Dubai. But if you thought that Carole McDonnell retired quietly into the night, leaving all her lies and schemes behind her when she fled, think again. She appears to have been up to her old tricks while hiding out in Dubai, and her destination was likely a strategic choice. The FBI can't swoop in to arrest her there without cooperation from the UAE authorities. In a 2026 Business Insider article, reporter Jason Garasio recounts a story from an entrepreneur in Dubai who says she befriended Carole McDonnell there in 2019. And it sounds like McDonnell kept the exact same playbook that had worked so well for years before. The entrepreneur said that McDonnell introduced herself as an heiress, and they became fast friends while enjoying a luxurious lifestyle. And eventually, she pitched an investment opportunity to develop three new shows for $7.5 million. Ultimately, the entrepreneur declined, and the relationship soured in 2022 when McDonnell tried to get more money from her. But who knows if another unwitting victim may have accepted since. Mary Carole McDonnell knew exactly what it took to create a compelling, believable story, whether it was for one of her hit shows or for the intricate personal narrative she used to finance them. And she wrote her own manipulation playbook along the way. She created an elaborate false identity that would deem respect, authority, status, all while stealing credibility from the McDonnell aviation family name. She was a master at status signaling with her Porsche, yacht, and pearls, and she used specific details like an $80 million trust fund based on a kernel of truth to make it seem believable, like having the McDonnell last name and she had ties to St. Louis. The strongest deceptions weren't completely fabricated. They were built around things that were true. And for a long time, it's worked. In fact, she's still at large to the day of this recording. But Mary Carole may have forgotten one important aspect about the type of people involved in creating true crime shows. People like Tim Clementi, a retired FBI counterterrorism agent who is one of Bellum's crime experts, appearing on many episodes. Or Joe Pistone, the retired FBI agent who went undercover for the mob using the name Donnie Brasco, and later produced and hosted Deep Undercover with Bellum. They have a fierce sense of justice, and they make their mission to seek it, no matter how long it takes. All right, side-eyers, thank you so much for watching and joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed this wild episode. If you did, please do me a favor and like and subscribe, or if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. That way you'll never miss a thing, and you'll help more side-eyers find the show so they can start spotting deceptive tactics before it's too late. Let's leave you with this week's side-eye question. What part of Mary Carole McDonnell's story seemed the most believable to you? What would have made you buy into one of her investment schemes? Drop your response in the comments because I really want to know what part of her story resonated with you the most. And bonus question, do you think Mary Carole McDonnell will be captured and brought to justice soon? Or will she be able to keep up her con while on the run? Let me know what you think. I'll leave you today with this reminder. Successful con artists make their stories just believable enough so you can rationalize any red flags. So, look out for inconsistencies and listen to your intuition when something feels off. I'll be back again next week, and until then, keep your side eye sharp, because nothing felt wrong until it did. If you have any information that could help lead to the whereabouts of Mary Carole McDonnell, please contact your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. You can find all resources for this story in the show notes.